This conference will now be recorded.
So hello everybody, it's Craig White. Sumatra's on leave this week and she's sorry she won't be able to make it. We'd like to thank you for joining on the call. It wasn't advertised as well as it will be in the future, and we're sorry about that. There was a little confusion with the with getting the call organized, and we'll be through with that soon. So as you can see, the I've got an proposed agenda on the call for today. It's kind of a simple one. We have one proposed item, and there was a item that went out on the mail list this morning for Paul's Open GPON OLT spec, and it's also in the chat window if you haven't had a chance to look at it. I know a lot of folks are probably aware of it, and we can add some stuff, but then we'd like to continue this on the mail list going forward, and then we'll probably have another call for other comments as required based on the feedback from the list. So yeah, we'll kind of wait a few minutes just to see how many people will gather and might join.
Craig?
Yes.
It's Tom. How are you doing?
Hey, Tom. Good.
Good. Good to hear your voice. I'm just wondering, I don't know if we'll have time on the call today or not, but there's a topic we might bring up, and if time permits and people are interested or eager, and that is to have kind of a discussion on how Telco fits into OCP, what we think is doing well or what we would like to see more of going on. I know that within the incubation committee, Aaron Sullivan has kind of reached out to lots of the folks who are in leadership positions and are looking for feedback around directions and so forth that OCP might take. And I thought if we have folks attending today and extra time, that we might make it an open topic for the Telco folks to discuss.
Sure, I think that would be a great thing, Tom. And I would actually like to get more kind of publicize that a little bit on the mail list. So if we could have people kind of gather their thoughts on it. Because like I said, we didn't do a very good job of publicizing this first one after we've taken over, yesterday essentially. And I think I would also like to revisit the working of the group. If things working for the group, where we like to add, change the meeting times, that kind of stuff. This would seem to be a good time to do that. And but I would certainly welcome the how things would fit in. And do you have any? Would you be willing to share that, or should we use our IC lead to lead that discussion? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, other than just the rascally thought of putting Jeff on the spot. No.
Yeah.
Either way will work.
Okay. All right. Well, I will put that down. And I did have an item for the the opening remarks and then new agenda items and then a little bit of time if someone had an agenda item. I think that this topic is very timely and important, and so I'd really like to give ourselves a little more time in a structured way to discuss this topic, though, you know. But I would be more than happy. We can either this discussion of
Sounds
new
good. Maybe,
items can either go before or after Paul. And I wasn't exactly sure how much time Paul needed, and so I kind of gave us a little bit of flexibility in there for new items. Um, and
okay, so
then
maybe if as an agenda item, we won't try to cover the topic as much as figure out how we'd like to introduce it or set it up for the telco project to provide that kind of feedback.
yeah, as a follow on and send some thoughts out to the email list and kind of gather some ideas there as well to kind of tee it up for the call for sure. Um, so let's see, how did I lose that one? I wonder. See if I can get that back. Pause the show. Well, okay. In any case, it looks like I lost my agenda. But so at this point, I'd like to cover a few administrivia items, and by that, it's really about the OCP Foundation, and we do have OCP representation today. But one of the things I'd like to cover is the European Summit that's coming up in October, which is a change in format from the workshop format that we've been having in the regions, which is the first summit type event in the regions. So if anybody has any questions on how that is, how the standard OCP website has all the information on the venue, uh, arrangements, those kinds of things. So does anybody else have any kind of administrivia item that they would like to cover? Any kind of update from the foundation? Like Kali, I guess, or looks like you're the only one at this point who's left.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the regional summit like you did. I put the link in the chat just to the general summit webpage. At this point, our schedule is pretty set, but we still have opportunities for sponsorship. So if your company is interested in a speaking spot or a booth or something additional like lanyards or happy hour, we have some of those options available. So just reach out to me. And then if you're attending as just a general attendee, the rate does go up after September 14th, so I'd register before then. And then, yeah, I think that's it. You can find all the information on the website that I posted in the chat. And the other thing I was going to mention is if you are going to attend, go ahead and book your hotel room as soon as possible before it fills up, and that's also on the website. So you can be in our block. But I think that's it. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, no worries. So now I guess now we got, is there anyone on the call who has any kind of opening remarks from the floor, or anyone who has any agenda items that they would like to cover today that hasn't been mentioned so far? Okay, sounds good. So guess we have a very lively audience today. So Paul, are you ready to start your presentation?
Yes. Hello, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Presentation, I didn't have time to see any questions yet. I just have the document as everybody else has it in front of him.
So Paul,
we could go over that. We could simply go over that.
Yeah, I tell you what. Why don't we do that? I'll make you the presenter so that you can move around in the document, and then
Yep.
it would probably be helpful if you could highlight some of the areas, that you're, still looking for input. It looked like there were several areas that there was some items of interest, and give us, more of your thoughts on that so that we can get this squared away and sent to the IC. So here, I'll make you the presenter now.
Okay. Go to moderator. Close the screen. Up.
Paul, you should see a box pop up that allows you to select show my screen. There you go.
So you see in the go to meeting on the right side as well, or is that invisible
No, the dashboard
for you?
yeah, it's invisible for us, so you can keep it open if you like.
Okay, no, I pushed it far to the side. So, oops. Well, the interesting thing is that does only show about 1/3 of the page. Maybe I should get it a little smaller. That's still readable for everybody?
It's fine for me.
Okay.
Yes.
This looks good, huh? Okay. Okay, so, well, this is revision 095. I'm waiting eagerly for comments on that. Let me see. I'm not starting with errata. Licenses, everybody should know. Overview. We know that for the moment, available for court and the open court project, there was the proposal which originated from AT&T about this 48-port GPON OLT built by Celestica, which was designed in a, I would say, very different way, because it is a extremely restricted, chip carrier only device, which does not provide any kind of aggregation and no aggregate management for the device as such, but only chips, micro semi GPON chips with a relatively low density. I would call it a last generation, yesterday's PON chip that provided 4 PON chips to one 10G uplink, 12 in parallel in one box with just a shared power supply and not much else. And the next thing that we saw on the project is the edge core OLT for XGS PON, which is a more modern style, today's generation of PON silicon, but it's for XGS PON and has a low port density in that it's only a 16-port device in 1/8 units and 2 PON ports for one PON chip for one device inside. But the biggest difference is that there's a common management CPU that has a internal connection to each of the PON SoCs, and at the same time there's a aggregation chip of the same vendor in the middle that gives all PON SoCs connection to the same northbound interface error NNI. That is in contrast to the GPON version. You have ideally just one, or if for redundancies desired, second uplink that is in a more fitting bandwidth. So I would expect that if it's in the same CO, that's 100G QSFP direct access copper. So that's a relatively cheap cabling solution which provides for very high bandwidth to the fabric directly. So I was having those two disparate device families available a good year before now, and it didn't feel satisfying for me because we were on 100% GPON in our deployment, and not planning immediately to go to a higher rate, but potentially for mobile backhaul or business services. But we still consider for quite a number of years that for while common customer use a GPON system with 2.5G downstream and 1.25 gig upstream is largely enough, and it still has a lot of spare capacity left for the couple of years to come. And there's a huge number of terminal vendors available, cheap, low cost, low energy terminals available, and at the same time the PON transceivers are in a much more interesting form factor. They are in SFP size and not in the as for today the XGS PON is in the edge core device for today is XFP, which is not only longer and larger, but only at the same time you cannot put them next to each other, so you can create blocks of transceivers, which severely limits the density. That's why we probably came to the 16-port only device. So this was as a basis for the box we now propose is something that was not enough in port density as the XGS version, and the other is many different uplinks and no option to have a centralized management. And on the other hand, and I simply took the available methodologies for management, that is the embedded x86 or potentially even ARM only management CPU that is used very often in the OCP designs. And on the other hand, a large main board with high port count GPON SoCs. That is 8 times the density for the XGS PON, so there's 16 ports per SoC for GPON, and it's 4 times of the last generation micro semi device, which was 4 port density per SoC. So I took this and simply assembled it more or less in the same way that EdgeCore did for the AT&T spec did for the XGS PON, and that yielded immediately with 32 ports per height unit box on one hand, and allowed us in a very easy way to scale up and say if NNI and the aggregation device in the middle is sufficiently large, it's very easy to put another layer of 32 ports, PON ports in the same device and scale up to 64 ports. To not clutter too much, or even try to have a design that is not extreme in density, to have a reasonable cabling density in the front plate. I deemed it not reasonable to try to go for 48 or even 2 times 48 ports in the 1 or 2 height units version respectively. As in a normal CO, the rack space is not at that premium as maybe for compute centers. That is why I stuck with the 32 and 64 ports, and at the same time that's a very natural fit with the powers of 2 count to stay with 2x16 port is better than something with 3x16 port, which would not yield a symmetrical. Well, board design is the least of my concerns, but usually all software is much easier to be designed if you have well, symmetrical divisible by two aggregates, and it fits quite well to the aggregating device in the middle. And so what's more? So I think that's enough for the overview. I sort of jump to the uplink because this is somewhat linked to the somewhat linked to what I'm starting off. Different at the edge core XGS-PON device is that there is only 4 times QSFP28 as an uplink, and one point that came to our minds at DT as a carrier is that we probably quite often will have the case that there's small COs that don't have a fabric right next to it, so there's no way of having cheap QSFP28 duct cabling, but we will probably often need fiber optic backhaul to some nearby CO which has the fabric. And the QSFP28 transceivers, for most of the offer is just 10 kilometer 1310 single mode, where I am aware that there is even a coherent 100G version, but it's very specific restrictions as of for the need of amplification. So the most logical approach for me was to break up the QSFP28 in 2x4 cages of SFP28, which allows for either standard CWDM transceivers as they're widely available immediately, which would allow for 8 channels of CWDM or even DWDM if preferred. And in the next generation, which is nearly available now, as I hear from our suppliers of optical transceivers, is that the same holds true for 25G SFP transceivers. That is, I expect very soon, probably at the same time that we have the first prototype of this, also DWDM 25G transceivers that could be very positively, very in a very positive way used with this decentralized, call it decentralized version of the OCP OLT to backhaul that to a fabric that is in the order of say 5 to 40 kilometers of distance from the fabric.
Okay, may I have a question? I mean,
yeah, sure.
Is the QSFP supposed to be used parallelly with SFP plus, or you can use either QSFP or SFP plus?
Because it's a fully switched, fully flexibly switched device, that is there's a huge Ethernet switch chip behind. You are completely free to mix and match whatever you need. So
okay, so 400
probably perhaps a 400G uplink in principle, but which is far too large. Which is far too large in reality. So any reasonable compromise can be taken as it's either 4 times 10G, for example, which is probably relatively decent, in contrast with what we are having in the field right now, which is only 10 for 128 ports, one single 10G uplink. So I think we are even on the safe side with today's low-cost transceivers.
Over-dimensioned, whatever.
But it would allow for even interesting combinations of, say, having two boxes like this stacked, and while having, say, 4 times 25G real uplink as comparatively high-cost WDM transceivers, and using the two QSFP28 to do simple daisy chaining. It's maybe a little more challenging for the management perspective for OpenFlow and all these things. For Volta, it's not really natural, but from the hardware perspective, looks very tempting.
Sure. Yeah. Good. Okay.
And as this is the fundamentally first building block is hardware, the software needs to follow. You can't build software on nothing, so you need to have the possibilities in the hardware. So that's why I went for such a sort of combination.
Perfect.
There's maybe one thing we see in the front plate. I have added the standard 1000 base T outband management port, and because as far as I know, there is usually multiple GigE channels available on a standard embedded computing board. I would propose as well to have a SFP cage here, which would allow for a separate, as you are most carriers will know, say a 1510 out of band management channel that could be placed here.
Yeah, but in this case, SFP will be either copper or optical.
Well, no, I think both would be. It's just 2 GigE channels that are connected directly to the CPU board. I think there's no restriction in using both, even at the time, if you would desire to. So you would probably run as a DHCP on both, and the one that yields the first connection, well, you could decide to disable the other port in order for certain security that, well, but this is purely operational.
First time configuration will be done over a serial port or something like that. So you will pick up the config for which port is supposed to be used.
Default, well, the standard setup for such a box is thought to be based on ONIE, the Open Networking Installation Environment that would request via DHCP on the available outband management channels an IP address, and would then download its software from via TFTP or HTTP, and then the ONL, the generic operating system of the NOS of the box could then decide whatever it wants to do further on. We have a very intense discussion internally as well as if once the NOS is available inside the box, that we would like to have a NOS extension, in a sense that nearly at or shortly after boot time, there will be a setup being pushed to the switch SoC in the middle of the box, which would allow for an in-band connection. So that is, if you have say 2 SFP28 WDM transceivers fitted, and you are in a remote site, that all further communication would not require the use of the 2 outband interface options on the right side.
Okay. So some kind of internal bridge will have to be used. I mean, from the management board towards the chipset of switching chip.
Yes, that is an interesting extension that needs to be done in the NOS environment, because you would not want to have this single point of failure NOS environment that you have right now, that is well, there's one ONIE boot and it boots just one NOS, and if this NOS fails, well, the box is definitely out of order. It will not connect to anything anymore. If you can't go outband to it and say reboot, or go to the BMC and say flash, erase flash and reboot from scratch and give it a new NOS. So this is an evolution that needs to be done. But it's again that's something that is software layer, and which the hardware would happily assume, provided that we do a good job in evolving the Open Network Linux, which I think would require an evolution of the partitioning in order to allow for redundant software as we are used to as a carriers in our legacy devices. So that is usually sort of no fail, or at least if it fails, it can fall back to some other software, which then allows again to have the whole thing manageable and repairable.
All right, yeah, that's a good point of view to avoid trips.
Yep. So we have the front view. And we have just talked to EdgeCore a couple of minutes ago before this call. We will spend a little more time on the labeling that is opposed to the box, because we feel that we have strict labeling rules in DT, but at the same time we do not really want the DT specific label being imposed on a world market, in a world production of OLTs. So there's probably interesting compromises to find for labels that will be factory customized. That is, imagine say lower part of the label, even a larger, well, either a label a little larger, having one part is provided by the customer, that is maybe even AT&T or BT or whoever wants to have such a 5mm strip, including their own specific material numbering and naming conditions, and the other part is standard factory for the white box provider that simply has his generic label. And well, this would be if your production charge of say 10,000 pieces, would be one part being generically labeled by the vendor, and the other part we would need to provide the rule how to fill up this other part and say we want to have it a certain numbering, a certain like production date, or a 2D barcode that identifies the specific DT material. So it's interesting part that is not yet covered in the specification, but we are thinking about that already, and we are eager for comments in that way as well, as probably labeling is something that is interesting to watch if you have the last 20 years of telco experience. You look on the boxes which has the regulatory labels from 100 countries, from Mexico to China, and so labeling is always interesting. Labeling. There's one more thing. I had a couple ideas about panel LEDs, which should allow for a good operational view when you're in front of the box and you believe that something wrong, or you have an immediate impression that there's nothing wrong because everything's blinking green and happily. So any comments welcome as usual. That's just the one thing we were not used to as a telco carrier, but it's much very reasonable when considering what we learn in a data center environment. Is this unit identifier, which could be software set to, usually it's sort of blinking blue and say, this individual device is the one that you need to care for as an operator, and, or even operator that may be a low-skilled second hired hand from another sub company, a contractor that needs to go to a certain row in the CO and take out a box for exchange or something. And if it takes the bad one, they will cut off hundreds or thousands of customers. So it's a good idea, I think, to have identity marker as proposed here.
I have another question. I have found some information that this is supposed to be used only in central office locations with proper climatization.
Yes.
And how about outdoor cabinets?
To a certain degree, that depends on the it's due to the format that I see of all available data center devices today, is that they're quite deep. And in contrast to the 300 millimeter telco devices, which quite reasonably fit in street cabinets, I don't see a 600 millimeter deep device with backside cabling and backside fans being as a very reasonable option in a sort of a normal street cabinet. If you consider street cabinet container, 30-foot container, then, well, yes, this kind of street cabinet, okay, no problem. But
okay,
I think
so
that the size does not really permit. I think the size doesn't really permit for using in real outdoor locations.
Mm-hmm.
Probably need to discuss. That's a thing to discuss for climate conditions. If maybe a non-air conditioned small concrete CO, say 3 by 3 meter concrete micro CO without air conditioning, that provides, say, at least a safe temperature range from 0 to plus 55 or something, that will probably be feasible depending on the components used. If there's highly reliable power supplies and sufficiently strong fan units, then you probably would be able to extend the temperature range to, well, to something that fits sort of half outdoor use, but not really outdoor in a sort of a small cabinet that is on top of a pole. No way.
All right. So it cannot be just half deep cabinet. It must be full depth cabinet.
I do not have the outcomes yet. There is a lot of work underway to get a first layout, or at least rough layout, to see what kind of size this box should be. But I do not expect it is much smaller than the today's boxes. And just to compare with the EdgeCore 16-port and the 48-port Celestica, they are both
they are quite
about 600 millimeters of net depth, and you need the back cabling and fan output, so it's at least 70 centimeters of depth. Plus, well, you need front cabling for the transceiver cages, so it's, well, a minimum space. Well, theoretical minimum maybe 80, but more reasonably something like 1 meter of depth for the whole setup. So it doesn't feel as something as outdoor.
If I might propose something about the 48 volts DC power supply, it might be good if it accepts the power supply from 24 to 72 as for radio. It's not too complicated to provide that from the point of view of a power supply, just to extend the input.
Yes. I thought, if I'm not wrong, if I was really missing that would be a bit strange. But I usually consider 48 volt as really power.
No.
If it's in here, I forgot. I would consider it plus minus 20%. That is 36 to 72 volts. 36 to 72 volt is a minimum acceptable, a maximum acceptable power excursion, voltage excursion range.
Okay.
So,
that's
I don't think that 24 volts is 24 volts would say for a box that is in the order of 500 watts running from one PSU. Is 24 volts only. That would mean more than 20 amps. So
yeah,
I think
right.
the not really a great idea.
Yeah. We don't want the fires like in US. Okay.
So we jumped a little bit. So maybe go back here. So it's about LEDs, panel LEDs. Any comments on that? No, not really, probably. Yeah.
Nothing extra.
Rear view. Yes, that's things about labeling that will probably be refined a little bit. So there should be a sensible indication for state. That is, if you send somebody to exchange a fan, he might not have listened very well if you say it's fan number 3, and anyway, fan number 3 is still count from 0 to 3 as you usually do in computer science, or is it 1 to 3, 1 to 4? So do you count from left to right? So it's probably a good idea to have a clear indication for a failed, and specifically a failed fan. And if the other ones are happily green, then you should probably avoid human errors there. Same thing is valid for the PSUs. There should be power present, and maybe a red one if this is failed, and no active light is not even a proof, but it should indicate that there's no power on the line.
Okay.
The power supplies, anyway, I think it's about common sense. You would have two redundant power sharing, load sharing power supply units. I would not expect that in a normal case you would use a mix of AC and DC. But it may even make sense if you have an available DC, how do you call it, a battery system, uninterrupted power supply available on DC. It may even make sense to have the uninterruptible power supply on the DC and have the AC run on normal mains to avoid additional conversion loss.
Yeah, we do have. My company is very small ISP, like 15K of subscribers, so very small when you compare with Deutsche Telekom. But we have such cases that we need DC and AC power supplies. Just not sure what, because of UPSs and DC power supplies parallelly, but we don't have like two DC power supplies. We have in one location we have AC UPSs and DC power supply. So we just wanted to do on this level redundancy, let's say. So
It's a very good remark. You probably should send it to me in the order that this should be maybe not absolutely mandatory, but as a good suggestion that they should be allowed to have a mix running on both types of power supply at the same time.
I will drop.
I wouldn't consider that as very difficult, but it should not be disallowed.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so then things like fans should be removable without special tools, and if there's ideas for alternate I don't think that the AC power supply AC plug is somewhat in discussion, but the DC plug could be. Historically it's very well known, and I like it because it's reliable. It's fine, but it's not really low cost. So if there's good ideas about an alternate proposal for this DC connector, well, why not? Just comments on this is always welcome.
The other solution is just to provide screws, but I'm not sure which one is better. This is a plug. In the other case, you have to use a screwdriver to add cables. Well, I mean, prefabricated cables would be simpler in the field to just connect.
Yes, probably.
Depends. When I see the external power, the power supplies that are hot pluggable, most of them, when they are with DC, they don't have such a connector. And I'm not sure if in this project this will not have to rely on some already existing on the market products, some kind of power supplies, and they might be already with like a three screws, plus, minus, and grounding, which is, you need to have a cable with proper ends on each of the wire, and use the screwdriver. I guess this is how most cases are done. Such a connector, as I remember, is used when the power supply is provided from the front of the device, and the power supply is embedded inside the chassis very often. But this is my observation. I might be wrong.
I would join that about what I see as well. There was another comment.
I'm from Tom. The DC supplies, the ones I've seen are like we just described, that they're 3 screw down terminals. We've been using those. The other thing that you can do is in a spec like this, where this is a directive spec toward other design documents, then you can indicate the requirements or the level of specification in your document, that some things might be must-haves and other things might be need-to-haves. So if you would prefer that type of DC connector, but you don't mind if it's something else, you can make that note in the spec to say this kind is preferred but not required.
Yeah, maybe there's some rewording, useful refinement in the text in general. Yes, that it's an acceptable connector, so it's not mandatory anyway. So yes, it's clear that maybe this part has to a certain degree rely on what the large power supply providers would give us as a more or less standard product, and not something specifically catered for this box, which would probably have a 30% premium just for this connector for the power supplies. So better invest the 30% premium in a very high efficiency than in the connector only, provided that the safety rules can be obeyed too. Maybe let's go on. So system overview that I talked about what I started from, and I explicited again what the market of today, unfortunately, does not offer a very wide choice of silicon providers, which do explicitly PON devices. As unfortunately, it's just one captive one, and the other one is the one Broadcom, which so the only sort of merchant silicon device that is on the market that is state of the art. The good thing about it is that it's a family, so it's not only doing the GPON, but it's allowing XGS-PON, NG-PON2, and even the two flavors of EPON, if somebody would care for that. So it's a family that includes flexibility. At the same time, this flexibility comes down to a common software layer, which is the BAL, this Broadcom adaptation layer from Broadcom, which is well sort of the starting point for the development of Volta, which is a good thing. Is that there is not a large difference in the software from the GPON to the XGS-PON. So I expect that 95 or even more % of the driver that was created, the driver they open OLT and the Volta classical version would fit nicely with the new hardware and would not require anything more than the adaptation of maybe if there's constants for a number of ports and the bandwidth values that's encoded somewhere. But the way of providing VLAN connections for the traffic management and the management of the PON terminals, the ONUs, should be extremely common and reusable for both.
Hi, this is Chris Summers from Keysight. I'd like to make a comment on that, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Isn't it a little bit against the spirit of open when you design in a vendor proprietary abstraction layer into an open standard versus a generic abstraction layer?
No. I wouldn't feel so because that's oops. You have a loudspeaker or something active, hands-free or something. I have a strong echo. Oh, okay, gone. No, I wouldn't feel so because for the very simple reason that is the only generic PON silicon available right now. As I said, there's one more vendor that produces PON SoCs, but it's fully captive, and there's no way to, for the moment, until now, to have this on as merchant silicon. And I'm very aware that the two large FPGA providers, there's only two as well, have devices that are large enough to accommodate PON functionality in them, but that makes is well, immediately it gets you a box that is different to a very high degree of this one. So the first idea of this was get something with the Lego bricks that are available right off the shelf, and I do not at all desire that this spec says you can only use this, but I think I worded that clearly, that my expectation is for the moment that there's only one device available that allows for a quick implementation of this spec. If somebody else uses the sort of the same faceplate and the same requirements for power for the common uplink, the common compute board, and he uses say 8 Xilinx FPGAs for the 32 PON ports, and whatever kind of you name it, Mellanox or whatever switch chip in the middle, and you think you get it, you create a Volta compatible driver for that in the next 24 months. Well, excellent, go ahead. I know that there are already not proposals for specs, but hardware vendors that went the same way, and they propose such solutions. And why not have a version 2 that explicitly mentions these alternate options for the inside? What I intended is that the number of ports and the arrangement and the common management port and an open NOS management software layer must be able to be implemented in that. If you go ahead and succeed in having open OLT driver that behaves that feels from the top nearly like this specific Broadcom solution. So great, it will be adopted happily by other people, provided that the price point is similar. That would be an excellent addition to the market. I think everybody's eager to have alternatives like this.
Okay, thank you for addressing that.
Okay, that and the one thing that I sort of mentioned earlier is that the faceplate was designed in a way that should allow to have a device, the 2 device variants being based on very, very high part of common components. So that is either a single PCB that can be populated with 2 or 4 PON SoCs and populated with either the 32 SFP cages for the small variant, for the single 8 unit variant, and populated say on the other side of the board, or the sort of piggyback or whatever mechanical variant that is appropriate to use the same PCB for the 64 ports to reduce manufacturing costs. And at the same time, that it's obvious that the whole software layer would just need a couple bits of modifications to allow for both variants. So that should be allow for big flexibility for the small variant, which for me evidently will be in all labs. In the first way, nobody needs huge boxes in labs, and probably also in some deployments for smaller COs, you could have the smaller boxes. And whenever you have a large CO, 64 PON trees doesn't feel as a too large device in comparison with the legacy 19-inch, say it's 7 HU or something boxes that even a couple of years ago had 128 ports, and you could easily go to 256 today. Yeah, that's about mechanics.
Hey, Paul.
And yeah, please.
I'm sorry. So I'll let you kind of go a little extra and use up all of our time. And so it's really time for the call to end. Are you at a place you feel that we could stop for now and then move the rest of the discussion to the list and then pick this up on the next call perhaps?
Yes, I think the base is set. I think there's uplink, everything is set. You just have the nice drawings, but you have the document to can have a look in it. So it's evident that this 32 and 64 port versions is very clearly visible even in this block diagram. And maybe the one thing that I omitted voluntarily at the beginning is that I talked with the chip vendor as well. So a timing module with probably an OCCSO, so oven controlled clock, is something that should be as not as a field replaceable, but as a factory option, can be fitted on the device. And 1588 clocking should then be possible with a reasonable quality. And yeah, I think I'm
okay. Well,
anything else can, as you mentioned, very eager to have feedback via email and
so
looking forward.
I'll send out an email to the list with a link, and I know that it's been added to the wiki as well, so that we'll get a larger, the larger audience that didn't attend the meeting today to cast their eyes upon it. And I think it's a great piece of work, and we welcome it. Thanks for your effort in it over the past year or so that you've been working on it.
Yep.
So
thank you. You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any closing remarks or anything that they would like to get in before we close the call?
Nope.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Thanks as well. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.